Hey there friends, so today let's talk about a slightly more difficult topic than usual, and that is toxic labs. I want to talk about two things here in this video. One, what is a toxic lab? And the second part, why you should avoid them. So what is a toxic lab? Well, a toxic workspace is an environment where people are not very appreciative of each other, where there is maybe harassment and bullying, where there is a negative atmosphere, and where that can affect negatively the mental health of some of the members of the lab. Now, mostly this is going to be about the PI, because the PI sets the tone in that lab. So when we talk about toxic labs, what we typically mean is toxic PIs. Now, there are different ways in which a PI can be coming across as toxic. And of course, people are different, and lab members will perceive these different traits in different ranked order for them compared to maybe some other lab members. And in fact, some lab members may not be affected at all by some of the behavior or traits of this PI, whereas others are more severely affected. So this is important to know. This is also to some degree subjective. So now it's important to realize that nobody is the perfect PI ever. I mean, nobody is the perfect PhD mentor, and nobody is always the perfect postdoc supervisor. But there are really differences in terms of how much people try and how much providing good mentorship and a healthy work environment is important for PIs. Now, some examples of traits and behaviors that can be described as toxic can be aggressive behavior or bullying. It can be creating a competitive atmosphere in the lab rather than one of cooperation. There can be a violation of research ethical guidelines or professional conduct. There may be micromanaging, where people constantly look over your shoulders and control every step of everything you do. The PI can be unappreciative of what you do and what you accomplish. They can be dismissive of your ideas, thinking they're not worth considering. They may have completely unrealistic expectations for what can be achieved in a given period of time, and that leads to unrealistic deadlines. They may not give credit to your work, for example, when they talk about results at conferences or meetings. Maybe they cannot admit when they're wrong, or maybe they have unreasonable expectations for work times, expecting you to be there at all times of day and during the weekends. Now, if your PI displays one or many of these traits, chances are you have a toxic PI, and you probably know. Now, of course, you can also have the situation where the PI is perfectly fine, but there is individual people in the lab that display some of these toxic behaviors. Now, that is also unpleasant and can be very irritating and demotivating to deal with for sure, especially if they're more senior staff, but also if they're in your peer group like PhD students. But typically this is not quite as severe as when basically the PI already sets that tone. Well, now that we have established what we consider a toxic lab atmosphere and a toxic PI, why is it important to avoid such situations? Now, you may ask, that is a silly question. It seems like that's awful to deal with. So why would anybody want to deal with that in the first place? Well, I'm sure nobody really enjoys that. But I think there are some arguments out there that favor just kind of sticking it out. And what are these arguments? People may say, well, sure, I know my PI is a jerk, but this lab has an excellent reputation, nationally and internationally. It's a world-leading lab, maybe. Therefore, if I stay in this lab, most likely I will be having the opportunity to publish high-impact journal articles. Most likely this lab is going to be very well funded, and most likely this lab will have excellent facilities to do the work that you're interested in. So people may therefore conclude that if they can somehow deal with the PI, then in the end they will have an advantage because they will have, well, published in great journals and will have opportunities they wouldn't have otherwise. So they think this will jumpstart their career, and they look forward to getting out as fast as possible and then getting into a maybe more supportive lab environment. Now, this is of course a personal decision. I hear these arguments all the time. And There is, of course, some degree of truth to it. However, I strongly suggest that you do not decide for this route. To me, suffering in this way generally doesn't seem to be worth it. And also you should realize that this is a big planet. And there are plenty of labs out there that are world-leading labs that are probably led by decent PIs, that are decent people. And that still you afford all these opportunities that we just talked about. So for sure, it's not only the jerks that are world-leading scientists, far from it. But I think this is a very common misconception that in order to be world-leading, you gotta be somehow cutthroat, and you gotta run a tight ship, and you gotta be merciless in the way you treat people. But I think this is an outdated concept. So here are some points for you to consider. When you're in a lab environment like this, you very likely, unless you're very special, will not really enjoy yourself. But it is clear, and there's evidence for that, that happiness leads to your doing better work. And so you're basically closing the door to giving your best. It may be the case that if the situation gets really tough, you may actually lose your passion and your interest for the thing that really interests you, and you may lose it for good. You may think in the beginning, I can deal with that. I hardly ever have to deal with this person anyway. But a PhD is a long time, a postdoc is a long time, and so maybe over time this will start to affect you more and more negatively and will have consequences for your mental health. And there's nothing more important than looking out for your mental health. Another point, maybe you will subconsciously somehow, even if you're a decent person, pick up on these bad habits because you see them basically in effect all around you. That's also not good. Now, you would certainly be a victim of the circumstances that you find yourselves in, and this is very clear. But in some small ways, you would be supporting this PI and the system that rewards them. And I think this is also an unpleasant thought, even though maybe this is not the main thing you should be thinking about. So I think these points taken together make a very strong case that you should avoid these kinds of toxic circumstances, toxic lab, bad actor PI. And you should instead seek out the leading labs, the labs that also do excellent research, that are led by better people. And they're out there. Now, this is all easier said than done because you may end up finding yourself in a situation where you are in a toxic lab and you didn't see that coming when you interviewed for the job and you had no information that revealed that fact to you beforehand. So another video is going to talk about how you can maybe spot these kind of toxic lab situations before you get into them. This concludes this video. So I hope that you appreciate that toxic labs are a reality, bad actors are a reality in our science system, because scientists are also people with the good and the bad. And I hope that I could convince you that you should do everything possible to avoid getting into the situations, especially if you have first-hand information that a particular lab that you're interested in is led by a bad actor. And with that, thanks for watching. Good luck to you. I hope you're in a good lab, and see you in the next video.